I say, goddamn, trap back jumping. And nigga blim blim, crack his head like a pumpkin. I do the cabbage patch with that perk in my tummy. To mix it with the lean, got me moving like a zombie.
Yo, yo, yo,
What's popping, bro?
man, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How about yourself?
I'm amazing.
Awesome.
I'm amazing here. At the studio on a Sunday,
Yes,
doing what we
sir.
do. But
Every
happy,
day.
man. How are you doing?
Man, I'm hanging in. I'm doing great. We are happy that you're joining us for the episode. And
You guys were invited me over, man. This is pretty cool.
thank you. Thank you, man. I wanted to hop into getting to know you a little bit. I
Okay.
know that you went to the Berkeley School of Music.
I did.
Yeah, so
I don't know how you found that out, but yes, I did. Like I don't really try and keep it on my social media, but I did do that.
I
Um,
figured out a little bit of
it's fine. It's
stuff.
fine. You were doing your job. It's cool.
So, what I wanted to ask though is, before going to school for it, what
Mhm.
really had inspired you to pursue becoming an engineer?
You know what's really funny? I actually didn't go to school to become an engineer. I don't think I think if it weren't because of going to school for whatever I decided to go to school for, is what then kinda led me into engineering. To make kind of a long story a little bit short, I'm from this really small town in Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico in a place called Playa del Carmen, right? Which is 45 minutes south of Cancun and 45 minutes north of Tulum. So everybody that ends up being like, "Oh, I've been to Tulum," I'm like, you drove through my town." And anybody that's like, "Oh, I've done a cruise ship in Cancun," I'm like, "You were 45 minutes away from where I'm from." Um, and that is all to say that I started off playing music, playing the guitar. I was, and I still am a guitarist. That's the instrument I just kind of feel the most comfortable with. But initially, I hadn't gone to school for that. I went to school for, film scoring. I saw myself being the next kind of, Hans Zimmer. I was like, "Oh, man," I was super into, like, Inception and a lot of the movies he had done, and, Danny Elfman is another film composer that I'm a huge fan of. And for some reason, I was like, "Oh, I can do that." I could, write scores, and little did I know once I was there, I kinda didn't really wanna do that. I was living with, one of my roommates, my only roommate actually, when I first got there, was from Brazil. He's from Brazil, a guy called Gianluca Girard. Shout out to Gianluca for sure. And he was studying, engineering and production. He wanted to become a producer. He's a great, incredible producer, lives in New York now. But he would, we were at the house together, and sometimes he had to go and do assignments at the studio. And he'd be like, "Oh, man, just come with me. After I'll do my assignment, we can just chill and listen to some music in the big studio, and, like, you can, like, feel what real studio's like." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And that's really how I ended up in engineering. It was through just connecting with somebody that did something that I never knew how to do, that I really got into it. Um There was, um, there was a period where I was really when I was first starting to play guitar, I got into pedals a lot. Guitar pedals were, like, my thing. I was like, "How can I make a guitar not sound like a guitar?" Because there was, like a lot of other places, I always felt like there was more guitarists than anything. And even in the small town that I was in, I found more guitarists than anything, so I was like, "Cool, how can I make my guitar sound different or just weird in a way?" And pedals were always the way. So when I kinda translated that, or when my homie Gianluca translated that from, like, "Oh, look, there's, like, professional pedals that are rack mounts, or, even in a easier and smaller form factor, a plugin," I was blown away. I was like, "Oh, wow, you can actually twist and turn all sorts of sounds, not just the guitar," you know?
Uh,
So that's kinda how it all started for me.
wow, that's that's a great story for sure. It leads me to another question, and that regards how do you think being a musician helped you as an engineer?
Ooh, it helps currently, like, it's not even a past tense, it is a huge advantage that I have over a lot of people, and it's not something that I like to just say, like, braggadociously. It just is what it is. Some of us came up with the musical skills, some of us didn't. But for me to just be able to communicate with real musicians with the actual terminology, that in itself makes people kind of disarm. They're like, "Oh, okay, he knows what he's talking about. He can talk about,
Right,
um, legato, forzo, fortissimo. Like I can talk about real specific terms like Lydian, Phrygian, modes, jazz stuff, dynamics. I could talk to a musician the same way that they would talk to themselves, I guess. And that always disarms people when they're in a studio and they're like, oh, I'm kind of nervous of whether this guys know what I'm all about.
right.
Um, so it's a huge advantage, I would say.
Sure,
But
that
it also kinda you're already training your ear to be listening to certain things. I was always that guy that was looking for there's in the guitar community, there's, like, a big search for the perfect tone, is what a lot of people say, and it's like, "Oh, who got it right? Did John Mayer get it right? Did Stevie Ray get it right? Did so and so get it right?" And it's like people are just trying to find a tone, and, there's a million pedals that'll get you distortion, but it's the subtle differences between, uh $120 Guitar Center pedal and a boutique handmade germanium da 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 whatever.
yeah,
And when you can start to hear those differences, it also gives you a huge advantage,
for sure.
you know?
Um,
But I
so
think more than anything is just being able to communicate with people in the exact language that they're talking about. Because I know a lot of cats that are really good at engineering and they know all of the terms when it comes to engineering, but anything else outside of the box, literally, they're just lost and gone. They're just have no clue what the fuck is really going on.
for sure.
So yeah, that's my 2 cents in
Yeah,
terms of, musicianship for engineering.
I totally agree. I'm, a drummer before here,
Mhm.
but school similarly influenced me, and that's how I wound up in the rabbit hole I'm in. But I think the the musicianship is something that can be developed, but isn't necessarily like required
No.
to be an engineer. So
No, it's not. I don't think it's a required trait. It definitely helps though. Like it's something that'll again give you like a little bit of an advantage,
right,
especially when it comes to the understanding of like knowing how to engineer people. Because there's that other side that I don't think we talk about a lot, which is like yeah, knowing all of your outboard gear, knowing gain staging, knowing signal flow is all very important. But eventually, you have to become a people person. As much as we might hate it, because we're like, "Oh, all I wanna do is just stare at waveforms on a computer." And it's like, "No, you have to be a good people person." You need to know how to read a room, you need to know how to, move accordingly, and especially in the sense of, like, disarming people and making them feel comfortable and, like, um, knowing your musical terms just is an immense and enormous advantage.
absolutely.
On on that hand, though, I am not one of those people that is out here insisting on it, you need to go to school for this. Um, it was a huge advantage for me to go to school simply off of the fact that it just gave me the opportunity to see what was really out there and available. I
For
was
sure,
limited to, like, a very small construed circle of people and a scene that was, very local, if you may. It was kinda designed to just entertain tourists or entertain whoever's visiting town, but there's no, like, super strong musical scene in Cancun, Mexico. Like, when have you ever really heard of, any type of a artist come out of there? It's rare.
fact.
I'm sure they exist, but, it's kinda designed to just entertain a certain group of people, so getting to see all of what was available and living with somebody from Brazil and some of my homies were from Argentina. Some of my closest friends were people from like Costa Rica and then some people from the US and like, just getting to then now listen to all of this stuff from all over the world and getting to understand the difference that it, makes to disarm people sometimes, whether it's understanding their actual language, whether that's Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, whatever it may be, and then their level of musicianship too. Because you also don't want to be the guy that walks in the room and just starts bombarding them with information if they are people that usually work on a loop in FL. You better shut the fuck up and not try and tell them how to do their job. Do your job. But having the most amount of tools to be able to move between the most amount of rooms I think is just the most valuable. piece for me.
Absolutely. You
Mm.
I need the boom, 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 boom sound effect because 'cause you're
I
dropping
got one
gems.
right here. Let me see. I got one right here. My homie Ant Clemens, man. He put me on. I guess I'll just air horn myself for the day.
You're funny. Alright, so now you graduate school. I
Mhm,
know it's probably a little bit of a gap in the timeline, but you go on to do some big projects. I wanted
mhm,
to talk specifically one that you won some Grammys for.
mhm.
It's a Latin group. They go by the name of Rake.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about your experience doing that and what it was like to win a Grammy at like such a young age?
It was a Latin Grammy, which is a little different. I don't wanna undermine it at all. I'm just
Sure.
making sure that the people out there know 'cause, that it is a little different, categories are different, the amount of people that are in the academy are different. It was really cool, man. I mean, honestly, for me, I started working with them while I was in school. I've known the guys for years. They're related to the family in some sort of way. I don't really want to get too much into that because there's people out there that are gonna be like, "Oh, he got the gig because he was related to." It's like, no, I actually waited until they had hit me before I ever was like, "Hey, yo, guys, do you need some?" And when my help was needed, I was ready to go. But I was never the guy to just jump the gun and be like, "Oh, you need to hire me." It's like, no. So I started working with them while I was in school, and that was a super cool experience because even while being in Boston, every now and then I would get a call of like, "Hey, yo, the singer's gonna be in." He was living in New York at the time. They were like, "Yo, you need to pull up to a session at um, Electric Lady," and I was like, "Yo, how is it that all of my professors in school were like, "It's gonna be years before you guys end up in one of these big rooms like this, blah, 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 blah." And I was like, "Bro, I was in one 2 days ago. Like, I'm still in school and I'm already engineering at like, big rooms." But
Yeah.
again, it was just a relationship that I had built with the group prior to even making music together. And then, when they heard that I was studying in the US and that I was already kind of on the East Coast and that the singer lived not too far from me, that's really where it all started. And it was really cool. I mean, it was a really interesting experience because at first that's just how I thought sessions were. We can talk about this a little later, but there's a huge difference between Latin sessions and sessions in the US. And I mean, and even when I say that, even all Latin sessions that happen in the US, they are very, very, very different. It might just be a cultural thing, it might be just a work ethic thing, but I was kinda under the impression that all sessions were gonna be like that, that I just got to hang out with some friends, got to, drink some beers or do whatever it is that everybody does to loosen up a little, do some songs and leave before do a song. He's an incredible singer, so he could do 4 or 5 takes of the song, not even really care. He would just be like, "I trust you, you got this," and he would just leave, and then I would have the studio for another 6 hours, and I would be like, "Okay, cool, what am I supposed to do?" I would comp the vocals, I would do my best. I would always do like 2 or 3 different comps just to like be safe, like, the best one in my mind, the second best and the third best, and just send it off literally directly to the singer. And then I would just get a yay or nay. Or it usually wasn't even a yay or nay, it was just which one of the 3 he liked the best, and then that just got passed on to whoever. The gig with them then turned off to be a little different to where eventually I put on my homie Gianluca, who had put me on. Once I moved to LA, he became his engineer because he had moved to New York. He became Jesus, who's Rake's lead singer. He became his engineer, and then they would just send me the session. And I would still comp it in LA, do my thing, tune it, do whatever I had to do, and send it back to them. And then after that, it would just either get sent to the label for, say, further production or sent out to a mixer for, a final mix. But that's really how it all kind of started for me. It was just through like still being at school and having built a relationship with them outside of music.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome,
it
man.
took out a ton when you mentioned that period between like me graduating and then now working with 1500, which is the people that I'm still working with. There was a weird gap in there where, I finished school and I was like, I'm gonna become a mixer. I am going to, I had this mentality of like, oh, I'm gonna I'm gonna come out here and I'm gonna take Mix by Ali's work, I'm gonna take Jason Joshua's work, and I'm gonna take everybody's work. Serban was the one that I was like, there's no way I'm probably gonna take his job away. But I was after everybody else's job. Um, Little did I know you couldn't just show up to the city and be like, I'm a mixer, send me records. Um, but whenever the group would come to LA or whenever, gigs like them sending me stuff from New York for me to work on, that I'm have to say that kept the roof over my head for a long time. Because it's a tricky game. You have to do a lot of stuff for free. You have to do internships. You have to do for people to just know how good you are and how dedicated you are to the game.
Yeah.
But already having a pre-established relationship with an established artist in Latin America was huge. Was
Um,
huge. I could still, and and a lot of people I was working with had no idea, and to this day have no idea, the significance of some of these records.
right.
Um, but that was just how I decided to move. I try to move very quietly and just kind of silent about the things I do.
Sure.
I
That's
don't know if
all.
that answered your question. Usually my answers are like really long and elaborate, but hopefully that answered your question.
I think it was a great answer, and you actually sparked a few more things. I wanted to touch on quickly. You said you have to do things for free. Could you maybe like elaborate as to uh how that can help somebody to gain traction with like more gigs?
Yeah, I'll explain from my experience because I always find it hard to be like, this is what works because it's different for everybody, and we all have different backgrounds. We all have different ways we ended up in the game. But I'll tell you kind of my 2 cents of how I ended up here. Yeah, it's just a lot of somehow having to prove to somebody that you can do what you do. And it's also demonstrating to people that you're so in love with the music and the process of making the music that it's not about the money. It's about the music, and then the money kind of comes afterwards. There comes a point where you kind of have to meet in the middle and be like, okay, bro, it's cool, but if you guys are all rolling up in all these expensive ass cars and talking about all this money like you do have it, and I know you do, but then you're not paying me, then you have to find a middle ground eventually. But, the way I ended up kind of where I'm at was, again, I came to LA and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna become a famous mixer," At the time, I was a little arrogant and I was a little cocky, and I just literally thought I could just sit in my home studio with some HS8s or whatever I had at the time and just, hit people up online and be like, let me mix your stuff." And very quickly, I realized that was never gonna work. Um, and the best way to become a good mixer was to become the best tracking engineer I could be. Because and that goes to I'll elaborate what that thought means because um the best way for people to really know what you could do as a mixer is if you were doing stuff with their vocals or with their performance immediately. Like if you were taking stuff that they had done and all of a sudden it sounded like way crazier, but in their face, there
Right.
was a much higher chance of then at the end of the session, when it's like, cool, time to kind of bounce this down. If you were like subtle about it, or if you could like, depending on again, reading the room, reading the artist, reading the client, you could always be like, oh, so who's gonna mix this for you? Like you could always kind of sneak in the question or find a way to suggest or to kind of you know let people know that you can mix too clearly, but without having to self promote, without being like, oh, I'm the greatest mixer of all time, I'm whatever. If they heard your work, ideally they just kind of turn around and go, bro, can you please just finish this for me?
Right.
Or the typical thing that happened to me, especially at the beginning, was I would do a tracking session for somebody, do my best rough mix I could, like on the spot right before they leave, because I know that a lot of people were still kind of doing SoundCloud or just putting it straight on YouTube or whatever. So I was just ready for that to happen. I was like, if anybody's gonna put anything I did, it better sound really good. And a couple times that did happen. People just put up the mixes up online or the rough mix up online, and I would get mad. But I always knew that I had done at least the best I could in the say 20, 30 minutes of a rough mix that I could. Um, but what would also happen is if they were a little more serious about their work, once they had collected, say, 10 or 12 songs, and they noticed that the best 2 were the ones that I had done, by the time it was time to like do a mixtape or whatever, they would be like, "Yo, man, can you mix the 2 that you can you finish mixing the 2? Plus, I have all these other ones." And I was like, "Sure." So it was in kind of gaining trust of people of like, "Oh, you can actually really, really do this." And a lot of those sessions were free at first, or maybe I would do the first 2 sessions for free and then kind of gauge what sort of a financial situation they were in. Sometimes I would to this day I do sessions for free if I really believe in the music. And if I think the artist really has what it takes and my tools or my skill set can help take their music to a whole different level, then I'll still do work for free. But
Right.
early on, yeah, you just kind of have to. I don't know. The system is established that way. It's established to where, yeah, you just kind of have to prove a point. There's a lot of people that want to get in the door, and there's a lot of people that want to get in the door for the wrong reasons. A lot of people just want the fame and glamour, and a lot of people, you know, actually want to do this for real and do it well. So I guess
Certainly.
that's just kind of a way in which you can sweep through the grass and the weeds of bad people.
Man, you just
I would love to change it. I would love to come up here and be like, "Oh, I'm coming up with a whole new concept that's gonna make it so that we don't have to do that," but not yet. Not yet.
man, it sounds like you're on the path, to be honest, because you just, keep dropping gems and gems on us.
Oh, man.
I wanted to I wanted to move into, working with 1,500 or nothing, that's kinda where I met you at, my
Huh?
first time,
Mhm.
and then, we have a lot of, like, close friends who have us, in common, but I'm curious, like, getting into that, what was, like, the initial steps for you? Like, was it a situation where you were like, "Oh, shit, I gotta be perfect, otherwise, like, my job's at risk?" Or was it more of a thing where, like, you were so confident at that level that, like, you just knew you could deliver for them every time and they could kinda see you were also delivering?
Um, it's kinda neither. I'll explain how I ended up here real quick.
Awesome.
It was while I was still in school. Um, those who I've had the pleasure of kind of encountering and sharing the story with know. But while I was still in school, Kendrick Lamar's "To Pimp a Butterfly" dropped, and it just fucking blew my mind away. It still does. Like, I'll still listen to it today and be like, "Yo, what are you guys doing?" Because, um, I was in a jazz school, let's call it what it is. A lot of Berkeley cats are like, "It's not a jazz school," but it is. But I was really into hip hop. I have an older sister that put me onto hip hop when I was really young. She's 12 years older than me, and she put me on to all sorts of stuff as a kid. M50, then bands like Gorillaz and Incubus and all sorts of different stuff. Um, so the moment in which that album came out, it felt like these two worlds that I was already living in just fucking blended into each other. And I became such a fanboy over that whole album. It made me really go in and dig deep into like the credits and find out about, cats like Thundercat and James Fauntleroy and Lawrence Dobson and Soundwave, Mixed by Ali, all these different like, all of a sudden all these names started to just pop up in my kind of not only on my Instagram and on my social media, but I was like, wow, these people are doing all sorts of different projects. It wasn't just the Kendrick stuff, but I became such a fan of how cohesive it all sounded. It just had such a cool way of blending these two worlds. And then guys like Terrace Martin that were like, insane at again blending these two worlds. Guys that had come from like a jazz background but were playing with Snoop for years, or guys that had been playing in church for a bunch of years and were like out here doing tours with YG. And I don't know, it got me into like this idea of like, oh wow, maybe a team or a collective is really where I want to be at. And in doing so, obviously I found out about TDE, which is one half of that album, which played a big part. And then the other half, in terms of like the production and the songwriting, was 1500 or nothing, if you really think about it. And that's how I got into, finding out about Rance and James. And then I've, been obsessed with the whole Pensado's Place scene for a while. I don't know how many people give Pensado his proper credit, but Dave, if it weren't for Dave, you and I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I mean, I'll say this show probably wouldn't exist, and I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But so watching a Dave Pensado's place with James and Rance was like where it really clicked to me. I was like, oh, there is another way. Sadly in school, a lot of the teachers were kind of on some, once you leave this place, you gotta go and you gotta freaking, intern at one of these big studios, and you just gotta kind of have to go up that ladder. And that ladder is usually, you're a runner, you get paid minimum wage if you get paid at all. You are probably going to be a runner for about a year or two, depending on, how good of a runner you can be, how quickly you can go and grab people's liquor and food. From there, you become kind of an assistant engineer, which is you kind of get to learn how things work. And then if you're really good an assistant engineer for again another year or two, then you might become an engineer, but that's only in case the client doesn't bring their own engineer. So the odds of you actually being in the engineer chair are again much lower. And then the big break is, oh, their engineer didn't make it and you just happened to be in the building, or you just answered the call and you showed up and now your life changed. Well, those are a lot of ifs to me. So I was like, you know what?
Facts.
No, if these guys are already the sound that I'm looking for in a way, or the type of music that I was looking for to work with, and they're already a collective that's well established, well, let me go and find a way to make myself useful there. Um, and then it's honestly, it was just kind of faith. I have to say, it was just it's God, the universe, faith, whatever you want to call it. Because I was in a kind of a really shitty job when I first moved to LA. Finished school, I was like LA or New York. Didn't love the East Coast weather because I'm from the beach. So I was like, no, let me
Right.
go to LA. And that's all I already knew that's where both the whole TDE scene and the 1500 or nothing scene were in. So I was like, that's really where I wanted to be in. But you can't just come over here and knock on the door and be like, I need a job. So long story short, which is already a long story. Sorry about that. James put up a post on Instagram. James Fauntleroy, legend, hero, friend of mine. It's crazy to even think that I could now be friends with somebody that I admire so much. He put up a post of like, yo, we're doing a focus group for our 1500 Sound Academy. Anybody that's interested, RSVP to this email. And I immediately RSVP'd. I was like, yes, I didn't have a car while I was living here, so I took the bus from where I was living in LA down to Inglewood. They're right by the airport, and took this like focus group class with them where they just kind of wanted to know what their experiences have been like at other schools, or what they might want from a school or whatnot, and then met them all. They were all here in one day. It was James, Rance, Brody, Mars, Q, like all the whole gang was here. And I remember thinking, I was like, man, I would be really stupid if I didn't ask somebody for a job. Like if I'm staring at these guys, it would be really stupid of me to leave and not really, so again,
Right.
I kind of read the room. I saw that somebody had been standing next to Rance for a really long time and was like his right hand. I talked to him. He pointed me off to talk to Pops, who was in charge then of hiring people. And this was a Saturday. I remember this very vividly. This class was on a Saturday. I had a meeting to meet up with Pops on a Tuesday. Showed up super on time with a resume, with a dress shirt on. I was like thinking this was like a real job, and started
Mhm.
working that Thursday. So it all
Wow.
within a week, I went from like really dreading what I was doing and having a shitty ass job that I didn't like, to then working kind of with my heroes in the lapse of just looking at an Instagram post.
That's
So again, the
one
odds
hell
of
of a
that post
story.
not ending up in my hands, it was a story, so it was 24 hours long. I could have not looked at my phone for whatever, the amount of ifs again of me potentially not seeing that. And then the post wasn't even of like, "Oh, we're looking for engineers."
Right.
You'll remember the story. It was just like, "Come over here and talk about your experience." And I was like, "Wait, these guys are putting together a school? That sounds
Mm.
cool. Let me just see what that's all about," you know?
Yeah.
Um and I'm now in their building. I'm at the Sound Academy wearing, official merch. You know what it is. I don't know
Yeah.
if y'all can see what's going on.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that's the brief version of how I ended up here.
Man,
And then yeah, then kind of from there, I did have a kind of more conventional story of my come up. It was, I interned for a super long time. There were other interns too. So at the time, you do feel the competition. They would start us on 1 day a week. So I was on every Thursday. But on Thursdays, there was, it was somebody was on the day shift and somebody was at the night shift. If you got the night shift, then you were cracking because sessions at night is really where it was on.
right.
People that were during the day shift, we had to just clean up the mess from the night before, and we had to just kind of address super super stupid stuff. But very quickly, I was so hungry that very quickly, people started to notice like, yo, this kid really wants it. This kid really wants to become an engineer. So started to engineer for Rance's nephew, who's a rapper. Shout out to Dante. He really put me on, and then slowly but surely, some of his homies and I'll still engineer for him for free. It's crazy today. But he put me on to so many people of his circle that were willing to pay, the 20 an hour or 25 an hour that kept me afloat, you know?
Wow.
So eventually I was officially doing the shift in the morning, but then I was kind of unofficially doing all the sessions at night because I was getting the direct call from people.
That's awesome, man.
And then all it took was Rance getting a phone call from Young Guru one day. I remember I was at the school. We were at the school cleaning up the building, kind of doing what we usually do. And Young Guru calls Rance to do some stuff on Meek Mill's album. I don't know if you were gonna weave into that at some point, but we might
That's
as well do
exactly
it
where I
now.
was headed. So
Um, and I just happened to be in the building, literally. At the time, his main engineer was this guy called G, Love G, G Money, what we usually call him, and he was also Nip's engineer, Nipsey Hussle. And this was at the time of them releasing Victory Lap, and then them going on tour for Victory Lap. So yeah, there was a long period of time where G was out of the studio, and there kind of wasn't another engineer. The engineer that was there at the time really wanted to become a producer. Um,
gotcha.
and he saw that I really wanted to be an engineer. So he kind of also helped, kind of push me into like telling Rance, yo, this kid is really good. You should trust him. And so one day, again, Guru calls and it's like, cool, can you do this? And I ended up, meeting a bunch of the guys from again, kind of re-meeting everybody from the group, but now in the setting of like more of a peer than like, oh, you're a fucking hero of mine and I'm just some peasant. To like, we're kind of on an equal playing field. And then ended up on, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 songs on Meek Mill's album that day. So as an
Right.
intern, I got my very first placement maybe like 6 months into me engineering for Rance,
Wow.
which was nuts, you
Yeah.
know?
And
And and to then, Rance is like, "Oh yeah, here's the email of who you gotta send it to," and it says Gimel. I'm not even gonna give you guys his email, but it's like Young Guru's fucking email. I was like, "Are you sure I should be sent? Like, you are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah, man." So and then like getting a phone call from Guru the very next day, like making sure my name was spelled right for credits.
right.
It is stuff like that that I just won't ever forget. Because it was just so impacting to the moment and then the rest of what I've been doing.
Yeah. Man, that's just such a crazy story, and it's awesome to, like, hear the behind the scenes because I think, like, a lot of people can relate to maybe a similar point in their life
Mhm.
as well as, like, I personally, at least, can admire, like, the hard work and dedication it takes to get to that level. Feel
Oh,
me?
no, for sure.
So
No, for sure, and it's just really knowing what it is you want to do, like, in my particular case, it was just stalking everybody that had been a part of a specific album that I liked. In this case, To Pimp a Butterfly, but if there's a specific sound or a specific artist or a specific somebody that, like, you're a huge fan of, study everybody that's around them. Don't just be like, "Oh, let me bombard X, Y, or Z with beats," because 'cause they're never gonna listen to them.
Right.
Or let me tell X, Y, and Z that I'm the best mixer in the world. They're like, bro, they already have a team of people. They don't. But if you then start, knowing the producers around the album or some of the songwriters behind the album or even the assistant engineers, you have a much higher shot at somebody actually being like, oh yeah, cool, come over and let's talk about it, or let's have
Yeah.
some coffee over it, or let's whatever,
Yeah. That's a bam 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 bam
Bam, bam,
bam.
bam, 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 bam. My phone's off
Yeah.
now.
All right. So for our next segment, we're gonna get into some plugin, maybe some gear talk, but you have a Pro Tools session loaded up that we're gonna hop into. Would you like to go over there and we can discuss a little bit?
Yeah, let's discuss it a little bit. Let me
Let's do
guys
it.
just let me just give you a brief into my head before I usually don't do these sort of things. I this is the first time I've done a live stream. I got asked to do a bunch during quarantine, but I don't know. I'm always scared of people recording what I say and misconstruing the message and whatnot. Um, but I like to just kind of give a brief description into kind of what's in my head, like the thought process, and before the plugins come into play. Um, so here is the session, right? You guys can see this now.
Boom.
I'm guessing
Yep.
we won't be able to hear a lot of it, but here's just like a brief visual of what a session of mine looks like. It looks like there's a lot going on, but it's not really. I promise. I promise. I promise. I promise. This is a record I did with a friend called Justice West. If you guys don't know who Justice is, go check him out. Justice is another member of 1500 or Nothing. He's a incredible guitar player, outstanding songwriter, and a producer. A lot of people don't even know he produces too, but he's an incredible producer. He produced the track and then is also singing on it. I know you guys won't hear any of what I'm playing, or you might over the mic. But just wanted to give you guys a brief, as to who we're listening to. But so usually I work with a lot of songwriters. Like I'm a part of a lot of different like writing camps or writing sessions, working with guys like James Fauntleroy and Ant Clemens. You kind of have to maneuver in a little bit of a different world because a songwriter is obviously an artist because they're creating art, right? But they're capable of like engaging in their own art for somebody, for themselves, sorry, and then they also know how to engage in the artist mode like for somebody else. So it's like a very interesting way of working because you kind of have to put your ego to a side, and that's
Right.
really interesting to me. So this is what the session looks like. Usually, to be completely honest, I just work off of like 2 tracks and vocals when I'm cutting. Unless I'm also like making the track with the group, which is also a whole different way in which I work. We can talk about that in a second. Usually I
Absolutely.
just deal with like a 2 track and vocals, right? So for now I'm just kind of gonna focus on this second half of the session. And you guys can see there's one that says beat, the track that says beat. Right now it's made inactive because I had imported all the stems so that you guys can see what's really going on. But this is usually what a session of mine looks like. I'm very organized, very color coding, very like anal with that sort of stuff. Just because I'm a big fan of if anybody were to just lean over my session, they could tell me exactly what they're talking about or what they want me to move or what they want me to slide over or copy and paste or I want to make it so that it Pro Tools is not a barrier. It's not like, oh, I'm the sole person that understands Pro Tools, so you gotta go through me to like no. If these days a lot of artists actually know how to run Pro Tools, a lot of writers know how to run Pro Tools. So if they need to sit down and do an edit, you might as well just make it easy for them, and
Right.
label and color code everything. Now that's just me. I know a lot of people that the very first thing they do is turn off all colors. Where did it go? You can like turn them all off. What is it? I can't even remember where it's at, but you know what I'm talking about. Uh, I know that, for instance, another person that I'm a huge fan of, and I remember being like super confused the first time I saw one of his sessions was Young Guru, because it's the very first thing he'll do is this. Oh, where did it go? Oh no, damn it! He'll just literally turn off all the colors for all of like everything, and
No
just
way.
working great. And I'm like, whoa, man, I mean, again, that's your way of working. So I'm not gonna, judge it, but it was very confusing to me. It was like, and it worked out for him for years. So I guess he doesn't have to worry about the same type of things I do. Um, but very briefly, right? I like to have my stuff. I don't know if my hands are gonna get in the way, but I hope they don't. I like having, labels for all my markers, sorry, for all the different parts of the song. Again, it makes it super easy for when people are like, "Oh, let me punch in something at the first verse." You're not guessing. You know exactly where you're at. And usually these type of markers I'm putting in as we're working on the song because it'll change, right?
Right.
The music a lot of times will tell you whether it's a song that's gonna start with like the intro, the 4 bar intro, and then the hook, or if it's gonna be the 4 bar intro and then the verse and then a pre-chorus and then a hook. If you're kind of really listening to what the instrumental is telling you, it'll usually go there. But certain writers will kind of want to do their own thing. So if they start with the hook, well, you gotta, know where the hook of the music is to then slide that over or move that around and to just kind of be fast with it. I like to, let people know that when it comes down to doing this engineering stuff, you should just be able to do and move as fast as the person that you're working with needs you to be, you know. Sometimes that means working extremely fast because that's the pace that they're used to, or that's the pace that they want you at. And sometimes working extremely fast with somebody that's used to working slow might intimidate them. So it's always just kind of adjusting to whatever people are doing. But usually this is what I'll be looking at, right? There's a beat right here. This gets routed to a different, aux. I'll explain that in a second. And I have all my leads, all my backgrounds. Um, I have a record track, which if you guys don't do this, you probably should. You should always have a record track and then the drop tracks, right? In this particular case, all my drop tracks would be all of these. They're all now labeled into what they became
Right.
after the fact. Once I know what that part is and where it goes, then I'll relabel it and just, make sure that I'm super clear on what is going on that track. But the reason why I only record it to one track means is because I also only playlist into one place. So I'm never have to go searching for stuff in multiple places. I can always just come back to the one spot.
Right.
Even if they had liked say something right here, but they were like, "Oh, let me punch in this last line," I'll mute this clip and then throw it up there and then playlist that, if that makes any sort of sense. I'll always playlist in the same place. Just so that I'm not scattered around looking for stuff all over the place. Just real quickly, I'll go over some plugins. This is some EQ, real simple stuff. Just rolling off low end, rolling off a little bit of the,
Do you
rumble.
have the
And
window
then this
open?
is subjective.
Do you have
This
the
is
little
all
plugin
subjective.
window open, bro?
Say that one more time.
Do you have the plugin window open? Because if you do, we
Yeah.
can't see. Now we can see. Alright.
Oh, sorry. So you could see that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, not a whole lot going on, just rolling off some low and then ducking a little, like shelving out a little bit of rumble just for the vocal. And these always change based on whoever's singing, right? And in this case, I just gave him a little extra shine on his top end. I don't know if it was the mic, or just his vocal needed a little extra, shine on it. But I always like to stick to something simple like a stock plugin in this particular case because I never know what studio I'm pulling up to and if this will open or not. And if I have fancy plugins at the very beginning, I don't
Yep.
want to have to deal with that, especially with like the record track. The record track, I want it to be as easy and as fluent as possible.
Alright.
Um, Auto tune, another beautiful tool that we all use and love. Something that I like to do a lot that I don't know if a lot of people do often is I work in chromatic exclusively. Usually, right, people set major or minor right here. I never, ever, ever do that because a lot of times, and this is no diss to anybody else, but I a lot of times work with people that can already sing and just use auto tune as a tool and as a sound, if that makes any sense. I know a
Yeah.
lot of people out there that don't necessarily know how to sing or, you know, need a little help, so they'll use the tune to, like, really push them into a space. That's not really what I deal with. I deal with a lot of guys that can already kinda sing, and just because the sound of autotune is the sound of today, that's what they're on. But,
Right.
so you put it in chromatic, you go into advanced. I know what usually people are used to looking at is this. Let's see if my auto-tune doesn't go crazy, right? This is usually what the auto-tune window looks like. I go into advanced and I set major or minor right here. Now, what that allows me to do is that allows me to be like, yo, if they are singing, say again, they know their notes. So if on a, I can I can tell based off of this that this is F sharp minor, F sharp what is it? Major, minor? I can't even tell. Minor, right? But if they wanted to sing, say the F, if they needed to sing the F that's not in the scale, I can make that active for them right here. I don't know if you saw that, and if you can
Um,
see how quickly you can make
I don't
a
know.
a note across the whole scale available. But let's just say, you're an F sharp minor and you needed the to sing the F natural F,
Yeah,
right? Because they want to hit that note on purpose because it's like a tension or because it's a whatever. We can get into like the specifics of the terminology later. I can literally make all of the Fs available immediately,
by
right?
clicking what again?
But I don't know if you can see this. There's this area down here that gives you all the notes, right? And those that are like grayed out are the ones that you're not available to sing. You can't you it won't let you hit a G, it won't let you hit a sharp, it won't let you hit a C, a D sharp, or a F. But if you all of a sudden, if they wanted to hit if they wanted that like half step between like F sharp and G, I can now make it available for them. And now they can. And the difference between working in major and like if I'm fixed here, like if I were to just let me just for the sake of right now, let's just duplicate this auto tune, right? So we can use it as an example. I'm in the same key technically, right? F sharp minor. But even if I'm in the advanced mode or the advanced settings of auto tune, if I'm fixed to the scale, I can't make any real changes down here.
Got you.
And if I do, I'm only allowed to make changes to the notes that it's determining that are in the scale. So again, these are things that, kind of being a musician and understanding what accidentals are and what passing tones are and what tensions are and all that sort of stuff helped me to when it was like, oh, I can't hit this note. Oh, I know that that's a flat 7 over a major chord. So I can just immediately give them what they're looking. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes
I'm not
perfect sense.
trying to, but again, this is why I don't set major or minor ever down here, up here. My actual template is set to chromatic. Like if you were to just pull up a random session of mine of any of them, autotune is always set to just C chromatic, and then I'll
Oh,
go from there when wherever I want. Everything else, I love this classic mode. They're supposed to sound like Autotune 5. It doesn't. It's very close, but it doesn't. If you're somebody that's actually used Autotune 5, you know what I'm talking about. It's very close though, and what I like about it is that it makes the low latency mode automatic. Like you can't even take it off when you're in classic. I don't know how many people knew that, but it just helps if you're already in classic. And then everything else is pretty straightforward. I don't, usually just kind of stick around to using the retune speed and humanize, depending on if people, really want a subtle tune or if they want the auto tune to be doing a whole lot.
oh,
So that's auto tune and the differences of why I do, the things that I do. And then a little Aurochs, nothing crazy. Nothing like I don't like overdoing the vocal, especially on its way in. This is where a lot of times people will run into bleed. And if you are routing your vocal to a whole bunch of different places, that's also where you'll run into like latency stuff. So if you
pro
notice, my record track is automatically just going to my lead all. It's not even going through my whole like chain of stuff, if you may. It's its own little thing. So yeah, I don't like doing a whole lot on the way in. If I have to, you can always put plugins on here or just make my sense any other level of crazy just to make people feel comfortable. But I try my best to do as little as possible on my record track as I can. It's for a couple different reasons I explained earlier. I avoid bleed if I avoid over compressing. I avoid latency if I'm not running through a whole bunch of stuff. And then also, it allows me to then, when I do drop you into one of these tracks, right? Any one of these that's already routed to this particular bus, you will sound better off the rip, if that makes any sort of sense. So even, you know, you might have sounded really good on this track, but then after I drop you into one of these that already has kind of a larger processing, if you may, it's gonna make you be like, oh wow, that's how good I sound, you know. So it gives people like if I were to give it all at once, if that makes any sense, it would be kind of hard for people to know what it is that I'm really doing. But if you hear yourself good here and then incredible down here, it kind of motivates people to feel like they're doing a good job. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, drop tracks, those all just depend on what's going on the song. Again, I already have one set up for my backgrounds, but backgrounds is already going to the background bus. And that's how I can kind of control them and tame them different. Um, After that, I'll briefly describe what's going on here. I won't go too much into detail because I don't want people to get caught up on like, oh, it's all the settings. No, it's not really about the settings. These all change based on the song and based on whatever we're doing. Just a little bit of lo-fi. I love the distortion, saturation in here is really good to just make kind of some vocals shine.
We
Three
we
that are
can't see
freezing.
your plugins when you're opening. Can you?
Opening them. I'm just
Oh,
showing you guys what they are. Because again, I
gotcha.
don't want people to get stuck on like, oh, these were his settings. This is what I have to use. It's like, no. Let me just tell you what I'm using, and you guys can, I'm not trying to hide anything. I just know from doing it myself. I remember getting caught up in like, oh, I need to find, Jason Joshua's settings or Mixed by Ali's settings and just replicate them. And that's the wrong way to approach it. So I'm not going to open them because that's not what I'm all about. I just want you guys to at least know the thought process behind them. A
Right.
lot of this chain specifically is actually taken and inspired by Jason's chain on a Rosalia record. Just putting it out there. I don't want people chewing me up online like, "Ah, he just stole." No, I didn't steal anything. I'm just borrowing the sounds and adapting them into what I like to do. So lo-fi, Pro Q3, RVox, again, just subtle levels of compression. 404, I love this plugin. This multi-band is life. For anybody that, doesn't really know how to use multiband and they're a little scared, this 404 is so nice and it's such a good kind of starting point. After I learned how to use this, every other multiband just kind of seemed a lot easier to use, but I still feel like that's the one that can get me a great starting point for vocals. Again, this is all kind of just taken off of my record template, right? Once it's really time to go and mix in a record, a lot of these things will change, but these are all my kind of starting points when it comes to recording some CLA vocal. I don't know how many of you over the quarantine were a part of this whole like Jason Joshua slash Mike Dean battle over CLA vocals. I thought that was really funny. I was kind of team Mike Dean, but I was still using CLA. I just thought it was funny. So I was, a part of the whole ride. And
Yo,
then
I
two
love CL.
C6s that are doing kind of different things, but mostly just attacking different levels of sibilance. And then a real last de-esser to make sure that the vocals are nice and clean. Um, After that, for instance, all these leads will end up right here, and these two I'll just decide to use if I really need them. I usually do, which is why they're already here, but they're made inactive, and it's just because I'll determine whether I want to use them or not later. In this case, it's a Soothe and a Mag 4, right? Like EQ. So I try and stack in terms of like compression. I try not to let one compressor do too much. So I rather have multiple compressors doing little amounts of work than having one do all of it. Does that make any sense? This is all coming back to gain staging and signal flow and whatnot. Then right here, I can talk about some of this, but given that we can't really hear the song, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make. But I'll explain the thought process behind, especially this very beginning piece of this audio. In working with songwriters, depending on who they're writing with, sometimes it's just a matter of giving people a hook. It's just a matter of kind of helping out with the melodies. Sometimes people want a whole record top to bottom, um, but a lot of the times it's mostly just kind of working with say a hook, if you may. But then in doing so, how can you make it how can you kind of help the writer instead of getting in their way. So
Right.
sometimes, and this is all just based on the type of relationship you build with these people, right? But being, being that songwriters are kind of on a similar page as engineers in the sense of like they've had to thug out through not getting paid or not getting their publishing taken care of, not getting their credits written right or spelled wrong. They kind of go through a lot of the same problems that we do. Um,
Totally.
you're already, more prone to building a good relationship with them and being able to trust each other relatively quick than say an artist that's already established or somebody that has already developed a sound for years and they're like, no, this is who I am and you need to just adapt to me. Writers, they're again, as I mentioned earlier, they're capable of taking on and putting on hats depending on who they're working with. So as an engineer for a writer, you need to be able to do the same and you need to make their job easy. So
Totally.
this beginning part of the song is actually like the hook. It's the same vocal that happens later in the song that's like super catchy. It's just chopped up in such a way that kind of, in dealing with like the psyche of people, it makes people remember the song kind of without even getting to the hook, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of, after the fact or maybe during the recording process, you trying stuff out, you like moving the vocal, right? If you see the waveform, you could actually probably tell that this is the exact same as this. I don't know if you can catch that from the camera angle. I muted two different lines at the beginning because he's saying dancing, we should be dancing or something like that. So you only hear the two words of dancing, right? So it's dancing, blank, blank, I want to be dancing, I think is what he's saying right here. Instead of whatever line it happens usually in the hook. And then you put all sorts of effects and stuff on the background to as soon as the song comes in, they're like already hearing something that they're gonna hear down the line. I don't know if that making a whole lot of sense, but it's like a psychology thing. You're kind of
Yeah.
hinting at the hook without giving them the whole hook. Right. So this very briefly, just kind of going over what I was doing here. Just the EQ to kind of telephone it, but not too much. I'm just rolling off some high end just to kind of cover it and not make it too in your face. Like it's supposed to kind of be more in the background. You're supposed to kind of more feel it than hear it. Auto tune again, doing whatever it's supposed to be doing. You can tell once I drop it into these, it's also kind of softer. But because I'm doing a whole lot more processing, I can kind of get away with that and make them feel like they didn't depend on the tune as much, because some people also get
Right.
offended if you put too much tune and they're like, oh, I can actually sing. Why are you, it really just depends on what type of music you're working on. Little Altar Boy, fucking love this plugin, man. Um,
Yeah.
doing a little bit of swag with the Altar Boy, double or four, and then you take out the direct signal. So the dry signal from the center gets taken out, so it's only the sides. Right. So this is something I like to do a lot too, to like kind of make backgrounds or ad libs just stay in the background and out of the way of the lead. Is just taking out the actual direct mono signal, if you may, out of the mix. Little Radiator, I love this plugin to just kind of give stuff a little warm, kind of mid-range boost. It's not doing anything. The only thing I do when I put this on is take off the noise because it's very noisy. It has this thing of like adding hiss. I always take that off. I'm using a one knob pumper that's automated. That's why you can, see this knob being all red. This is a dance song. This is like a four on the floor, 126.5 BPM. So it's a little faster than your regular dance song, but it's still, the premise of the record is a dance song. So I would only really do something like a one knob pumper on a dance record or on something that like explicitly needs that kind of side chain compression sound. Some Pan Man, because who doesn't love some Pan Man? Again, trying to just keep things out of the way of the center and make it more so it's like, the vocals kind of moving from left to right. And it isn't until like maybe say the third or fourth time that you hear the song from the very beginning that you're like, oh, that was actually the hook, just with a bunch of effects on them and a bunch of stuff that kind of was teaching you the song before the song even really started. And then
Right.
some RC, because why not? RC is nice. I love me some RC.
Yeah.
And that's about it with that. But I like to do that often if I can, if I'm allowed to, if the song kind of lends itself to. I love trying to hint at a hook or hint at the catchiest part of the song from the very beginning of it. Again, you have to have that relationship with the artist. You have to have that relationship with the producer and that trust, right? So that, they don't think you're somehow overstepping into their shoes, because you're not. But I always like to think of it as like, oh, I'm just trying to do the best for whatever's best for the song, right? And
Right.
just stay out the way, really. So in this particular case, I stay out the way by literally letting the song tell me what to do, if that makes any sort of sense. I know that sounds super trippy, like, oh man, what is he on? And I'm on nothing except for, loving what I do. And in this case, it's just doing whatever's best for the song.
Yeah.
So another thing that I want to mention when doing these sort of things, the best thing is to do them live. And when I say live, is do them right in front of people as it's all happening. As they're coming up with the next line, you should be like on the headphones or on the small speakers, trying an intro or an outro or a whatever, and getting their reaction. Like, make sure you turn around and see if it's a yay or a nay, because a face will tell you everything. Like, a reaction will be like, "Oh yeah, that was cool," or and then you know whether to like, oh, let me just mute what I was trying to do, or let me go a different route. Or you might have all of a sudden inspired a whole new part of them. They're like, oh, cool, let me use that for this other thing. Or can you put that same effect on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
right? But it's just, you got to make sure you have built the trust with people before you start doing kind of vocal production sort of stuff. I'll use an example of what I mean with like the psychology of having people learn a song before it happens. I love how they did it on Leave the Door Open, Silk Sonic, right? Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak. If you listen to that song again, um, within the first half of a second, they are already teaching you the song. They come on with I think it's like metal things for kids, like it's almost like glockenspiel but smaller.
Yeah.
Um, right, and they're already teaching you the Leave the Door Open melody. I can't play it for you guys right now because we'll probably get the video chopped down or whatever. But go back and listen to the song, and within the first second and a half, they're teaching you the melody of the hook.
Wow.
Just go back, and I'll leave that as homework real quick.
Yeah.
Then let's jump into whatever else I was doing. I think this was a pre-chorus section, which always, might stay or might not, but just to make it sound a little different, I put a nice doubler on it, make it a little wider and a little different sounding. And then my hook though, which is right here, that has really nothing on it except for the auto tune and the chain afterwards, right? But this one, just to make it super clear and make it super obvious of what he's saying, that has no real effects on it. After that, I did go a little crazy. Down here, it's all just madness. All of it has altar boys. All of it has all sorts of different effects on them, and it was just based on this one section of the song. I should have called this like a drop more than a break, because again, it's a dance song, so it's like the part of the song where it kind of breaks down and builds into this big like, woo, we're partying, we're dancing, right? So I had to kind of do something in here that was interesting enough, and you can see how the beat even drops, right? So there's less stuff going on beat wise. He filters it and it all kind of comes back. You can even see the waveform, how it grows. So I had to find an interesting way to fill this space with a vocal that was different. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to follow what the music is telling me. Does that make any sort of sense? So it's
Yeah.
really the same part as the hook, just chopped up a little different and with some other effects. And then I had Justice do 2 layers of ad libs that again sound pretty crazy. Like, given that I put all sorts of effects on them,
Yeah.
they sound kind of crazy, right? And like, for instance, one of these is has a pan man on it and makes it so that, the ad lib is kind of going from left to right, and it's making you kind of feel a little confused with the beat dropping out, and like, all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Um And then what is this last one? I can't really remember what this very last track is doing, but it seems like it's some sort of vocal with a lot of this, which I love this plugin. I've seen a couple different shows that you've done of like, oh, what's your favorite free plugin? This is one of mine. I don't want to say it's my favorite free plugin. Supermassive. I don't know if you guys can see this. I love this plugin.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, it's like out here, free. Anything Valhalla makes, it's $50. So it's already super cheap. So if this is not free anymore, it might be $50, but still, that's not a whole lot of money.
Right.
So yeah, that's usually what I'm doing, say for leads. Again, I'm never scared of just putting it straight on the actual sound and then just turning the mix knob down. I used to be super heavy on like making auxes for everything and whatnot, but I also realized that if I'm only gonna use it on the one vocal or on the one sound, and it's only gonna happen in the one moment, um, there's nothing wrong with a mix knob. That's why they make a lot of these plugins with mix knobs. So
Right.
I'm never against just throwing it on the actual insert of the track and then just bringing the mix knob down for whatever I'm trying to do.
That's awesome.
Um, and then background bus is pretty much the same. The processing is just going to change a little bit. Sometimes I'll usually compress more low end on the 404 for backgrounds. And then my effects do change. It's like the level of effects. Usually the backgrounds are a little wetter in terms of delay and reverb and whatnot. But yeah, they get treated pretty much the same. Unless I'm doing something super particular, they're treated pretty much the same. And then in terms of like panning or processing, this particular song, we wanted to do a lot of the doubler because it gives it that kind of phasey, flangery, doubler chorus sound.
Right.
I know that's redundant in saying doubler twice. Um, but if you notice, I still kept it mono. There's a version of the plugin where you can do mono to stereo, or you can stay in mono and just get the flavor. And you can see how it made this mono track stereo. Right now it's stereo, and it gives it actually legitimately makes it wider. Or if I'm just going for the actual sound of the doubler, I'll keep it mono so that I can still pan it however I want to. Because if I were to have gone for the mono to stereo setting, it would have actually then given me two pan pots, and then you have to do a whole lot more, and then just placing vocals can get tricky. So
Right.
sometimes I like the doubler more for the sound of the doubler than for the wide feature of the doubler, if that makes any sort of sense. So in
Absolutely.
this particular case, these backgrounds were having the doubler on it more for a texture and for a sound than for the doubler widener feature itself, you know. And I try and these are the some of the few things that I did learn from like the scoring time that I did. Is how important it is to like try and keep low frequencies closer to the center. And a lot of scores, and especially when you're like conducting an orchestra, a lot of the instruments that are playing low notes will usually tend to be closer to the center. So like tubas or upright basses or whatnot, they'll be closer to the center. And then you have like violin one and violin two, or viola and cello, right? So you kind of have a spectrum to where like your high end is to the sides, and then you start to bring in kind of mid-range a little closer to the center, and you try your best to keep low end as close to the center as possible. I obviously pan it a little so that it's out of the way of the vocal. But if you can tell, I'm going, wider as they go higher in pitch. And then some of these that are probably super high actually have the doubler then making it a stereo track. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I lose you? I hope not.
I'm with you.
Okay. Um, And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, besides that, I'm not really doing anything super crazy on the backgrounds. They're getting all processed in this one place. The one kind of main difference, I guess, is, they'll end up in two different places. So sometimes I can turn down all my backgrounds. And I did 4.6 dB, and say in this particular case, I turned down the vocals 2 dB. One of the things I want to point out real quick, though, is that these are going to the all Vox, right, which is at the top. I didn't want to get into that just yet. But and then all these effects, which are all the slap, quarter note, hall, all these sort of things are going to a different aux that then ends up at the all aux eventually. But the reason why I keep them separate is because I can then grab all of my leads or all of my backgrounds and literally push them into the mix. If that makes any sort of sense. I kind of really want to I wanted to see your reaction on that because I know
Yeah,
it probably seems and sounds odd, but it means I can keep because this changing this won't change at all the amount of send that's going to the different vocals. Does that make any sense? And it also won't change the level at which they're getting hit by the compressors it won't actually change the sound of the vocal at all. It just will kind of tuck them into the back a little bit.
right.
Does
Yeah,
that
I'm
make
with
any
you.
sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Because then all the effects are staying in the same place. But if you just kind of ask the singer to like take a step back, if you may, like literally, if you were to like be like, cool, man, we got everything set up right, and you're like, just stand with the band. Don't be in front of the band. Sometimes the record wants the singer to be in front of the band,
Right,
but in the instances of where you want to have the vocal inside of the band or inside of the music, that's the easiest way to do it. Is just kind of tuck them in by just dropping the all leads or all backgrounds, but keeping the level of dimension and 3D and depth and whatever. I
right.
don't know if that made a whole bunch of sense.
Yeah,
Maybe it didn't.
absolutely.
Maybe it didn't. But this won't be the first time we do this, so it's okay. And then another thing I love doing. And this I will say out loud, I took this directly from Josh Goodwin, or at least the thought process. Again, I didn't take the presets, I didn't take but the idea of um, having delay throws or just throws in general be audio tracks. So I love, love, love having, and this is again, this is you guys are kind of looking at a mix between the mix template and the record template. They're all kind of they've become one and the same because of how much work, how much kind of mixing on the go I'm doing, mixing as I go I'm doing. So all of these again are just, eighth note, quarter note, and like a half note. This particular one I had already printed the effect. So that's why you probably won't, this is a little different and I automated some stuff in here and whatever. But usually, I mean, for instance, in this case, right? This is the effect is at 100%. So even though it might look like the vocals are gonna be playing on top of each other or they're gonna sound phasey, they won't because the vocals are always gonna be whatever value this is off from the vocal, if that makes any sense. I know other people that have done this show have probably already talked about this, but I'm just explaining my thought process behind it. And this is just again for when you're working with a writer or when you're working with an artist and you want to kind of give them that super polished and almost done, that the record is done feel as they're making it. If they did a line and the line is cool and there's a gap in between that line and the next line, and they're like having a tough time, like, figuring out the line in between the lines, sometimes if you just kind of throw the last word into a quarter note delay and they allow themselves to just be like, oh, okay, cool, that gap is filled now. Let me keep on going to the next line.
Yep.
You can make the process just move so much faster. It's not always the case. Again, you have to learn the writer or the artist that you're working with to not overstep what they're trying to do because they might want to fill the bar between the bar. The next, the lines in between the next two lines, they might want to. But if it was very clear, like, okay, cool, this is the pre-chorus and now it's longer notes, I'm just kind of speaking off the top of my head. Um, let me take the last line before the chorus and just put some throws on it so that it's very obvious of like, oh, something different is about to happen. And then that can help them in the writing process, right? So, yeah, for instance, in this particular case, I already have the throws already lined up and ready to go. So I don't even really know what he's saying, but I can always edit the throw however I want to, right? Because drawing in automation is cool and all, but I'm very visual, as you can tell, right, with the color coding and the labeling and all these different things. So I like to look at everything that I'm doing, so that it's not underneath the hood, and I have to go out there looking for what track has the most amount of sand, and like it's just tricky. So I rather look at what I'm doing. So
Right.
yeah, that's usually how I do my effects sends, if you may, like throws. Everything else is just like, a subtle amount will stay on the track always. But if there's a specific sound or a specific throw that I want to do, I'll just do it on an audio track.
Interesting. So you don't ever like print it through the audio suite. You do it directly on the track.
I do it directly on the audio track. Yes.
Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super fast way of doing it and a super fast way of being able to edit it also afterwards, right? Because
Right.
then again, like look at this, I could change the fade so it could be to where like you barely hurt it's not even hitting the first two words, but for it to not sound like because you know how on if you were to automate it, the fader literally has to kind of come down from a spot into where it's supposed to go and it has to come down.
Right.
So this is the closest way to being able to replicate the feeling of like, oh, the fader was coming up naturally and then coming back down or maybe just staying there. Um, is through fades. So a lot of my throws have fades on them based on whatever word they're saying or whatever feeling of it. I can hear, the difference
I
um,
see.
really, really quickly. And I can change it just on the fly. If I committed to it, if I audio suited it and committed to it, well, then I'm kind of limited to whatever, and they're ready for the next line. So I might not have time to be like, oh, let me edit that real quick. So I might just throw it on the quarter note throw and be like, oh, I'll adjust the sound that I want for the throw later. Or I'll adjust the type of reverb that I want after the throw later. But at least kind of on the spot, they're already getting this feel of like, oh, okay, cool. Wow, he's in the song with me. He's engaging and helping me out too. So that's another way in which people, disarm and feel like, oh wow, he's good at what he's doing. Let me call him back or let me,
Right.
whatever it is. So yeah, and then all of these, for instance, are going to they have their own little aux right here, which is the throws aux. That's again just in case I got a little carried away and a little excited with what I was doing. I might just turn them all down just right here, or I might want to EQ or compress them all together.
Right.
You know, so they all go here. This goes to the all effects, which is where all the rest of these are going to as well. Um, and those end up all with the all Vox eventually. Yeah.
You're
So
you're
that's pretty much all of what I do in a tracking session. You know, well, mix
right.
session is a whole different conversation, but at least when it comes to tracking, this is how I'm able to kind of make my life easy and all of those people that I work with easy as well. And then these I have on my template. I usually have more of these. Let me see if they're in here somewhere. I have a lot of like hidden tracks on here. Again, you guys are looking at like a mix between my record template and my mix template. They have just merged into one one really large template. I think I do have a couple throws in here that I left out. Let's bring those up and show you guys the sort of color palette of stuff I like to have. Oh, look, here's the actual throw before I printed it. So, this is a specific setting where I was going for a specific sound. I'm automating the sand of the delay, and then I'm also automating the feedback on this specific delay. So that's why that got printed. That eventually got printed out to this audio track. I think I was just trying to cut out the where it stops, like where it actually, where the delay didn't just shut off. And then I could have automated the mute button, I guess, but I think I was just going for a specific, like, okay, after a certain amount of repeats, it just shuts off right here. Which is why I printed the audio the way that I did. But these are all just different colors of stuff I like to do. Again, they all have autotune on them. The autotune is grouped. So if I change one autotune, it'll change them all, which is really nice. I don't know if you guys have talked about that before, but
We haven't. Do you want to maybe give them a little sauce?
yeah, it's really easy and it's really simple. But it's in groups, right? I have a group called autotune. If you go into modify, attributes and global, I do both of them just, to make sure that it works every single time. all of the controls of insert B will be grouped together, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yep.
So in this particular case, all of my audio tracks, besides my record track, because this is the one track that this might vary. So this track isn't actually grouped into the auto-tune one, just because, and again, sometimes they might be singing in F sharp minor the whole time, and it wasn't until like the last line in the pre-chorus into the hook is where they did the one note that's different. So, I'll make sure that they can sing this, but I don't want it to change all of the rest of my stuff. Does that
Right.
make any sort of sense?
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
record track isn't in the same group as all the rest of them, just off of the fact that sometimes while they're actually performing, things might change, and I don't wanna then, mess up all the rest of what I had been doing.
Right, right.
So in this particular case, if they were to do something a little weird or different, I'll change it on the record track, and then I'll probably have to duplicate one of these and change the settings outside of the group, just so that everything can be working as it should. And then at the last line of the pre-chorus, maybe the one line has a different auto tune, but then it comes back to everything else being normal. So
Yep.
I just wanted to make that point up real quick. But if I open up this auto tune and I open this other auto tune, right? So these are two different ones. I don't know if you guys saw that, but I grabbed the one from the intro, this top one, and then I grabbed this very bottom one, ad lib, right? And then in this case, you can see I was doing different levels of tuning for them. So I probably wouldn't change this, but just for the sake of you guys seeing how the group works, I will. In this case, probably to have him, the backgrounds are so tucked in the background. Um, that sounds kind of redundant, but they're tucked to where maybe I could get away with having him on a harder tune than I would on the leads, because the lead is super in your face. But just for the sake of conversation, right? Let's just say that I all of a sudden want to change this so that they're all in F. And did you see how this changed immediately? I did it
Right.
on one of them and it changed on both of them. And then let's just say I want them all to be at 10. And now it changed both of them.
Wow.
Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
So this saves a whole bunch of time instead of then having to adjust this and copy and paste this over a million times, which is what
Yeah.
I used to do.
Right.
Now just having a group, makes it so much easier. So much easier. Let me actually put it back in the key that it's supposed to be in, because I'm gonna press play and it's gonna be in the wrong key. For instance, the throw tracks that also have an auto tune on them on insert B. That's the one thing you have to then decide and make sure that you're aware that your auto tunes all have to be on the same insert, whether that's insert A or insert B. I
Right.
always have an EQ before my tune, just because I like to clean up what the auto tune is working on. If that makes any sense. I,
Yep.
I I want to polish it. I want to, like, how when you go and wash your car and that those drive-throughs, they'll always have the guy with like the gun outside and like get some of the dirt off before you actually put it through that's what I try and do with the EQ. Before I throw it into the actual, car wash, I like to just get some of the dirt that I can before it hits the tune.
That
Um,
that's a great
so there's just
analogy.
affecting it a little different. You know what I'm but you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say, right?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's awesome.
Um, so then, in this particular case, all my auto tunes are always on insert B. So if I were to, probably these settings already changed as well on this here too. They should be on speed 10, right? They were probably on 8, but in this case, because they're all grouped, if I've moved one of them, it'll move all of them. So
Yeah.
that's also helps, because I don't have to be worrying about like, oh, will my throws be in key? They're
Mm.
already like, if you know what I mean. Once I establish what key I'm in, I'll change the group and it should change all of them. Really. Um, the other thing that I want to make sure you guys know about is this. Let me show you real quick. This is part of my template for sure. The fact that my record track has this little text box that says the key. I know this for many is gonna be like, oh, why do you need that? Well, because there's people that don't have this exact same version of autotune that you do. And it's gotten tricky, right? Because and I love autotune, I love Antares, but there used to be a time where it was either autotune or EFX, and that was about it.
Right.
Now there's all these different versions. There's the artist, and there's the EFX Plus, and there's the blah blah blah, and there's the live, and there's all these. So whatever version you're on might not be the session that the version that the next person's going to be on,
Right.
or you might actually all be on AutoTune Pro, but they're just different instances of AutoTune Pro, and for some reason it like trips out sometimes if it's not the exact same version. So sometimes it'll look like everything worked out, but if you press play, your vocals are all over the place. So I like to always make sure that I put the key that I'm in once I know. Like once I'm recording and once I hit found the key, whether that's on a piano roll or a lot of the musicians that are in the room can play instruments, so I can turn around and be like, "Hey, yo, is this in such and such?" And they'll say yes or no.
Right.
um, I'll write it in just to avoid, again, I'm just trying to narrow the amount of mistakes that somebody could potentially make to the least as possible. So I write in the key for whoever's next after me.
That's awesome.
Really.
I know they appreciate that one too.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Right.
I do, because I hate it when, you know, sometimes, and don't get me wrong, it's okay that, certain people use these tools, but mix and key be getting the keys so wrong so often. It is like really need to work on their algorithm. And I get it, sometimes you're throwing in a really complicated piece of music in there, and it's
Right.
supposed to understand all of these, frequencies and translate it into a key. And it doesn't always, or it'll give you the relative major or the relative minor or whatnot. And that'll make it so that the autotune is pushing in a different way than if it were the actual key that they're singing in.
Right.
And again, these are all just like super nerdy musical terms, but it helps when you're like, oh, that is the right key, but the tune is pulling it in a different, it's pulling it a little weird. So
Right.
instead of, doing C sharp, let me go A minor. The notes are exactly the same, but it's now looking for A minor as the root instead of C major. So, those sort of things sometimes help when you can just kind of jump around between different things. And once you figured it out, why not just make it easy for whoever's going to be next or after you in the process?
For sure.
That's how I like to think about it. And it
Yeah.
also ensures that, whoever ends up with the song, then when you get a bounce back and the autotune's all crazy, they can never point at me and be like, "Oh, I never knew what key it was in because I told you." Now it's your fault whether you were looking at my session or not, or whether you had the same version, or whether you called me, or whether that's really up to you. I gave you all the tools. It was
Right.
really, you know, I know people that'll do the screenshot and put that in the session. That works too. Whatever really helps, just make sure that the song is there every time.
Absolutely. I I
Yeah.
think I think that's the true like definition of an engineer too, you know. It's really like making the best song possible regardless of your personal feeling.
Oh, for
Or
sure.
you can
Oh, no, for sure.
relate a lot with that too. But I think that was a big growing thing for me personally is being able to accept things the way they are versus wanting them to be the way I did.
Yeah. See, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we're in the service business, right? Especially as an engineer, you are not the guy who is creating the track, and you are obviously not the guy who's behind the microphone. You can be, but when you're at the engineer chair, you are there to serve the song. So you kind of have to put all of whatever were your ideas or your intentions out of the door immediately to
Absolutely.
become really good at this, if that makes any sort of sense. You know,
Sure, man.
um,
I
yeah, to me, it's all about kind of being selfless and letting the song tell you what it wants to be.
I couldn't agree more. Um
Hey, man.
I wanted to open up the chat to maybe some
Yeah,
questions
let's
from
open
the
up the chat.
audience. Let's pop over to our chat box. Boom boom.
Boom, boom.
Here.
If there's
Um
anybody out there that speaks Spanish that wants to ask me a question in Spanish, I'm here. Talk to me. Talk to me. I'm trying to build a community of Spanish speaking engineers. So let me know if you guys are out there.
Joelle Vanilla said, I love recording with Dylan.
I
Let's see.
love Joelle. I know exactly who that is. She was trying to hide with the vanilla, but Joelle James is an incredible writer. Shout out to Joel.
I'll give him a few questions. Um, I had a couple questions for you personally. That is like, what I see in your template is a lot of routing, and that's really what a lot of my template is. Um,
Yes.
it's flavor. If I had chocolate chip cookies every day, I might not like chocolate chips as much. Where if I had peanut butter, oatmeal, chocolate chip, like snickerdoodles, you got that variety. So,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
all
Yeah,
that to be
that's
said,
mostly what I use the template for. I don't know if that was your question, but it's just to have a
exact
large palette of colors available to me and just go in whatever direction whatever direction the record needs me to go in, I'm just ready. So if we gotta
right,
go a little old school, I got the old school setups. If we need to go hi-fi, new age, go there. If we got to meet in the middle, obviously we could do there. So and then I love listening to stuff that just has weird sounds in it and just try and find ways to replicate it. I'm a huge fan of like, oh, okay, somebody did something I can't figure out how they did it. Let me figure out how they did it. Let
for
me sit
sure.
down and like really dial in that like weird Billie Eilish vocal. Like, how do they do that? Now
Yeah,
I know it's Logic, so it's kind of hard to really replicate it in Pro Tools, but at least I know the thought process that, in this case, Phineas, or maybe it was her directly, went through to get there. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is what I would do.
right,
Or Rosalia, for instance, she be doing some stuff that's like super weird sometimes. And I'm like, how did you do that? But
mm,
I listen to the song over and over and over again. And I'm like, it's a mix of a stutter with an auto pen with a blah, 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 blah. And then this is how I would do it.
right.
I don't have the session in front of me, so I can't know for sure, but it at least got me in the ballpark. What was your question though? Because I interrupted you.
Oh, you're good. We had a couple people ask some in the audience. Carl Milo asks, I noticed I saw Arvox in the tracking, but one reason I stopped using it was latency. Do you still use it while tracking as well, or do you run it different?
Yeah, I've never run into problems with latency with Avux, if I'm completely honest. I've run into a lot more stumbles, I won't call them issues, with autotune than I have with Arvox. I don't think I've ever run into problems with Arvox. I also, and this is not a flex of any sort because now there's even faster computers in this, but I did one of the big investments I made in myself was at one point buying the fastest computer that you could buy at the time. In this case, this is the last generation of 16-inch MacBook Pros, and I went 64 gigs of RAM. I went super high on the graphics card. I don't think a lot of people consider the graphics card for Pro Tools, but you have to consider that a lot of what the plugins are doing is has to do with visuals.
Right,
So a lot of the reasons why Isotope, for instance, is super heavy is because of how clear and how good they are with their analyzer and their visualizer of the frequency. So you
right.
have to have a good graphics card.
Yeah.
So I've to answer the initial question, no, I've never run into problems with Arvox.
I think I might be the same way too. And it's funny that you mentioned the graphics processing because I had like a mid 2012 MacBook and I went and bought like a Black Magic GPU just because it could run so much more if I offloaded the graphics process to the external processors.
Yep.
That's some gems. Um, our next question comes from DC Maybon and he asks, "What type of monitors?"
I wish I could turn around the screen and show you guys but my computer is all like fixed up with a bunch of stuff. Um, I'm at the 1500 Sound Academy right now. And this is a similar setup than what I have at the house, but I'll break it down. It's Revtone cubes. I don't know how many of you have heard of the company called Revtone, but Revtone is this company owned by Dave Hampton. That's incredible. Again, somebody that I used to look up to as a hero, and now I can call a peer, which is really cool. And he makes Revtone the cubes, which are like the equivalent of like say Oratone, if you may. And then he also makes replacement woofers for NS10s. And I use NS10. So going in order, I use the Revtone cubes, Yamaha NS10s, but with the Revtone woofer. And then I have some ATC's SMC 25A, I think is the full name of the model, but the near fields that ATC makes, and I love them, love them,
Yeah, that's
love them.
fire.
The reason why I use the Revtones, as opposed to say the regular Yamaha cone is, um one is that, they're made off of a different material than your usual NS10, and it makes it so that it's all one piece. I don't know how many people have actually looked at a NS10 cone before, but it's folded into itself as opposed to it just being one solid piece that's already molded into that shape. So
Mm,
the fact that it has glue in the middle can change the sound. If you start pushing the speaker a little too hard, and if you've had the speaker for a long time, or if you bought the speakers used, that glue a lot of the times starts to come off, and that'll actually change the sound. Some air is actually then sneaking out of the cone, and you're not getting a super direct translation of what it's supposed to be doing. And then also, the Revtones cones, not only because of it being a solid piece can then take a higher load, it also has a lower frequency response, which I could get into detail about that. It's actually not a it doesn't add more low end, it just has a flatter mid-range, which then gives you the perception of more low end. But,
right.
again, because they're new, it's a new company. I feel like I can push it. I don't need fuses on them. I don't like how fuses make NS10 sound. But I also don't want to blow up a super old Yamaha. So the Rev tones are great in that sense.
Mm,
You get the NS10 sound plus some low end that you wouldn't regularly, and then you can also push it harder without feeling like you're gonna blow it up.
yeah, that's fire.
So big shout out to Reftone because they make incredible products.
Mm,
They're not paying me to say this. I'm just a big fan of their work. And then recently I got the ATCs. I got the ATCs maybe like a month ago, a month and a half ago, maybe.
yeah,
And I love it.
I love
Love,
ATC too.
love those speakers.
Great detail. We have some more questions that came in. Our next one is, do you ever do sessions on the go, such as maybe on headphones on an airplane or something? If so, do you have a preference?
Never done a session on the plane, and here's why. Um, Stuff sounds very different up in the air. There's a physics thing that actually goes down, which is, air is compressed up there, and you're already in an enclosed environment where they have. Long story short, things don't sound the same. So you might work on a whole mix over a 6-hour flight, and then you come down and you're like, why does it sound so different? It's like because everything physically changed from being 30,000 feet up in the air to now being at ground level. Um, I've never recorded any vocals on a plane. I have recorded stuff on, like, a dressing room or a hotel room. Um, but I do love my where are they? My Audio Technica ATH50Xs.
Yeah,
Love those. I got, like, 5 pairs of those between the wireless ones and the non-wireless ones, and some with the original cups and some with replacement cups, and I just have a ton of them. I love those, and I feel like they just translate really well. When it
yeah,
comes down to describing speakers and headphones, I do wanna say this, to everybody out there, don't go and buy whatever your who you look up to is using. Make sure that whatever you already have or whatever you're gonna go and buy, just learn it as best as you can, because we all might change our minds. Between me, Baines, TZO, Ali, we all will probably give you different headphones we like to use. The difference is we probably have been using the same pair of headphones for a solid year or two and have heard an enormous amount of songs, both commercially out to stuff that has never and probably won't ever come out.
right.
Now you know what the headphones sound like. You know how it translates to other mediums. So whether it's the cubes, the NS10s, the ATCs, the whatever you're using, just make sure you know your speaker.
That's
That's all
great
I'm gonna.
advice. Um, Our next question comes in from Crash Snow. It says, "What do you focus on most when creating a rough mix? And usually, how different or what percentage is it from the final mix?" Thank you.
Ooh. Um, what do I most focus on in the rough mix? That it sounds as good as it can, really. I try and compete against myself. I'm trying to make sure that if I'm not gonna be the final mixer, I wanna make it really hard for whoever is to beat my mix, you know? Because again, coming back to the original idea, I want it to be to where you do end up giving it to somebody else. It doesn't sound as good, and then you call me back and you're like, "Yo, can you do the mix?" That's really what I focus on. Like, what can I do that's a little different that's gonna kind of make me kind of have an edge on these people, you know?
Right.
And it's not about like, oh, let me throw in the craziest plugin that I know nobody else has. No, it's about just doing something creatively different or interesting that will make them want to have me do the final mix. And it's not a selfish thing. It's not about like trying to cut out the other person's job. It's just that's how I think.
Yeah, that's it's killer. That's the way to do it. Um, let's see. Lucid Productions asks, "What was the most high pressure gig you've done, and how did you navigate through it?"
Ooh, high pressure gig I've done. Um, there's been a couple different ones. One that I'll like the first one that pops into my head was um working on the Jay-Z and Nipsey song, What It Feels Like. That was it, one is that it was a long process. It was about 2.5 years of us working on the song. But the real moment that I kind of felt the pressure and I was like really like, oh my God, what is going on? Was the day that Young Guru came by the studio and dropped off Jay-Z's verse. You know, Jay-Z's verses won't come in a weed transfer. They get dropped off in person.
Wow.
Um, so, and then having at this point, I've already built a relationship with Guru. I mean, we went through the fact that he was the first person to really the first placement I got was with I mean, it was through Rants and through 1500, but it was because Guru called and I just happened to. So I feel like there's a really cool connection between me and Guru. And this was the first time that I was not the first time I was working on a J song with him, but it was the first time he was handing me the files. In the
Wow.
past, it had been like, yo, we're just working off a Goose Drive, and I would get off the chair and never hear the record until it came out, if it came out. This
Wow.
was the first time I was getting handed a file with his stuff. And that made me like, there were several nights where I was just like making sure that I had backups under backups and that they were all under passwords and that all my, no bounces of it until it was ready to go. And that was like a really nerve-wracking experience for me. It was just more than anything, it was
Wow.
just kind of holding on to files that I knew were really valuable. And how I dealt with it was just staying super organized and staying super on top of my stuff, and double, triple checking if I needed to. But yeah, the last thing I needed and wanted was you know, for a Jay-Z and Nipsey song to leak under my hands. Oh, that was probably the most nerve-wracking moment of my career for sure. And then it was also one of the most relieving when the song finally came out and I was like, yes, it's out. It doesn't like I can sleep in peace now. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
And again, it wasn't like, Guru was it was really pressure on myself. It wasn't really nobody else implied a whole bunch of pressure, but it was like, oh wow, this is a whole verse that's nobody's ever heard. And
Right.
holding on to it for it wasn't even that long. I think between him doing it to it coming out, it might have been like 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But it felt like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Because we were working on it every single day for those 2 or 3 weeks after he did it. It was a matter of like, post production and whatnot. So, feeling very careful of like when we would work on it, I would still, mute his verse a bunch of the times because I never knew who was gonna be walking in or out of the room. So,
Right.
at this point, a bunch of people had heard Nip's verse and had heard his hook. But having a whole verse again, I was just like nervous that like, it's whole.
Right.
And again, it was the first time that, Guru wasn't there with me at all times while the vocals were getting played. So I felt a huge responsibility from a hero of mine. He never said it. It was never, but it felt kind of implied. It was like, cool, can I just plug into the hard drive? And I was like, it was one of those times I remember we were in Paramount Studio C, which we already call Nip's room because that's where they did a lot of the Victory Lap album. And I was working off of my laptop because the computer at um, Paramount couldn't handle the plugin load and the
Wow.
session. It was such a big session that I was running it all off of my laptop. It was pretty insane. So he's like, "Oh man, can I just like plug into the computer?" And he plugged in his drive and gave me the files off of his. It just felt so surreal. And even talking about it right now is pretty surreal.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad it's out because I would have been so nervous of just sitting on that song on my drive. You know.
I can only imagine, bro, but that's amazing. Super cool
But
to hear. We have a few more questions. I know that we're getting close to our end timer,
mhm.
but um our next question says, are there any new plugins that you're using that have recently?
uh, that have recently come out. I mean, one of the newest plugins I got that came out not too long ago is what is this company called? Is it Cable Guys? Cable Guys makes no, I don't think it's Cable Guys. What is their name? Give me 2 seconds because I have the session open, so I'm just gonna type it
Okay,
in.
cool.
Um Newest plugin that I got was I've been messing with Crystalline. I don't know how many people like Crystalline from Baby
Oh
Audio.
yeah. That's that shit.
Yeah. That's relatively new, I know. And that's super, super cool. But the other one I'm talking about is damn, Kickstarter 2, Nicky
Oh yeah.
Romero, but I think that's with who makes that? I can't
Um
remember who makes that. And I don't know why it's not popping up on my session.
it's not cable. I think Cable Guys
Oh, there
makes
we go. I
Kickstarter.
think it is Cable Guys.
Yeah.
That I've been using a lot lately. It's really cool. I know I
Oh,
was, briefly earlier talking about like pumpers and sidechain and stuff, and it's a great tool for that. I don't
awesome.
usually do sidechaining unless it's a dance record or unless the record is asking for it. I'm not one of those that like, oh, in order to make space for my 808 and kick, I sidechain. No, I don't do any of that because you're already changing the sound of
Right.
the drums and the 808. So I don't do any of that. But when it comes to doing something creative or like taking a piece of a 2 track and filtering it in order to, make the part feel different, I love plugins like Kickstarter.
Yeah. That's fire, bro. I love that too.
Mhm.
I recently got put onto that. Man, it's a quick way to get that sound.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um
I don't know for sure.
I was
Without
also
having
gonna
to do all this, the compressor and a throw and a side chain and the input and the key is just
too much.
again, things we know how to do, but if one plugin can just get me the sound immediately, then that's the best,
Right.
really. Because I like to just again, going back to like just feeding the song whatever the song wants. Sometimes if I can't get it there fast enough, I'll just give up and I'll just move on to whatever else the song wants me to do. So sometimes just having the one plugin that'll get you there fast helps a lot.
Fuck yeah, man. Our next question that comes in is what type of amps do you use on your NS10s? Bryston's or something else?
Bryson's, yeah.
Yep.
Bryson, I got a Bryson top of this year. I was using a Crown for a while, and it was nice. It wasn't, but then I really kind of heard it was actually in talking to Dave Hampton that he was like, "Oh, maybe you should at least try out a." Because I know all the studios have Brysons, so I was kind of used to, I guess, the Bryson sound. But if until you have something to compare it to, you're like, "Oh, NS10 is an NS10." And if we're completely honest, the reason why NS10s became famous is because they were like the consumer level, aka the kind of shitty sounding speaker that translates into the real world.
Right.
So like, why invest so much in an amp for something that's already? But then I really got it. Like there was a day in which I was here at the school. I brought my Crown, and Dave brought a Bryson, and we tried out the same pair of speakers with a different amp, and I was like, oh wow, it does make a huge difference,
Yeah,
you know.
for sure.
So
We got two more questions coming in. Our next one is, how do you approach the low end, particularly 808s translating to consumer sources?
how do I address it? Um,
How do you approach it?
how do I approach it? I like to have there's something that I think of a lot when I'm working, which is this kind of law of threes is what I like to call it, and it's based on some teaching that I actually had with one of my music teachers in Mexico, and it was really based on like some guitar theory stuff. But it was the idea of that in every genre, there's always going to be three main elements that pop out, right? And you got to really determine what those three elements are per genre. So, uh, for example, right, the difference between um, a reggae record and a trap record are that, first off, the instrumentation is probably going to be different. But second, if you were to play it super, super low, like as low as humanly possible, where you can still hear it, there's going to be a lot of times three elements that you're listening to. And for instance, in reggae, it's probably going to be a guitar. It's probably going to be some sort of like either a rim stick on the snare or some sort of like a rhythm on the upbeat and then the vocals, right? Probably. And then in trap music, the loudest things, aka the three elements, are probably going to be, a kick or a 808 or both, a hi hat and vocals, right? These are the elements that you always have to look out for. So it depends on what song I'm working on. I don't like to approach low end the same on every record. It really depends on the genre and the type of music that you're doing. Um, and then based on that, I'll very quickly determine, oh, is in this genre, is the 808 or is the bass supposed to be louder than the drum is? Or are the drums supposed to be louder? In which case, you then kind of have to think of this other thing, which is who's going to be the king of the low end? Is it the kick or is it the 808? You know, and then it's just a matter of rolling off low end on one as opposed to the other to make space.
Interesting.
That was a long answer, but it's and then the rule of threes also applies to when I'm doing compression. When I'm doing
How
compression,
so?
I don't let any of my compressors do any more than 3 dB of compression.
Oh, wow.
Any more than three. If I'm going for more than if I'm looking for a more compressed sound, I'd rather put two or three different compressors, all doing 3 dB worth of compression, than one doing say 9 dBs of compression.
Yeah, that's
So the
that's
rules of threes goes a little deeper than just you know the genres. It's like this weird thing that I don't know. I have a thing with numbers and colors.
that's cool. I mean, I dig it. I think that that's very unique. Anytime I can get my faders to like three matching numbers, that's just what I leave it.
Yeah, yeah.
um, our last question, it comes in from Brandon. He says, part of doing this kind of shit, especially when you're first getting involved professionally, hold on. A lot of the process is all about overcoming adversity and persevering through stuff. What kind of advice would you give an aspiring engineer to get through tough times?
Have a very clear idea of where you want to go. Like have like, and what I mean by that is like have kind of clear pictures of like, oh, in a year or so, or in 5 years, or in 10 years, and kind of have those goals lined up. Where do you see yourself? And then make sure that you're in that actual direction. Because some people maybe see themselves here, but then since they're working here and they've already been for here for 5 years, they feel like it seems, I don't know if I'm clear. If you have a goal and a vision, then just keep working at it. Um, yeah, adversity is just gonna come your way. That's just what it is. But I've also learned that through going sometimes through the hardest moments is when at the end of that part is when you start to see some fruits and some yeah,
Absolutely. And
some payment back from all the hard work.
those are some great answers. Sure, you've definitely been dropping
Yeah,
gems on us all night.
Hey, man, it's a pleasure for me. I really, it's been really inspiring for me to be a part of not only the 1500 team as like a production house, production team, however you want to call it, but also being part of the academy. And I wear this with a lot of pride. It's so, how can I say it? So gratifying to be able to give back to people, and sometimes in explaining what's very logical to you and very obvious, and having to put it in really easy terms makes me remember it better or even do it faster a different way. So helping out others has just made my career just bloom and flourish immensely. So I encourage everybody really to teach as much as they can to whoever they are working with. Don't be stingy about information. Don't be like, oh, I'm not going to give you my template because like da 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 da. And it's like, bro, it's not about the template. If you're really scared about giving away your template, then there's something wrong with your process. You should
Right,
be able to hand it off to anybody and just be cool with it. Some people might take inspiration off of that and use it in their own way. At
right.
this point, all big mixers have put up some sort of video on how their process works, and they're all giving away their game. So why wouldn't you? You're,
Facts.
I mean, I'm not gonna say you're nobody, but you don't have the means to be pretentious about your information when it's actually not yours in the first place.
Right. We all done
We
learned it
all borrowed
somewhere.
from somewhere. So
Facts.
I really like this one phrase from a guitarist that I like a lot that says, it was in failing to sound like my heroes that I found my own sound. And I'm like, oh, there we go. And it's sitting down and studying what's the difference between a Jason mix, mix by Ali mix, Serban mix, a Dave Pensado mix, a Tizio mix. What are the differences between all of them? And
Right.
how can I take bits and pieces off of all of them and make my own little thing, right?
Man,
That's how I think of it.
that's amazing. That's a great conclusion for the episode. Uh
Woohoo!
Thank you so much for coming, man.
Yeah,
I wanted
man.
to ask, is there anything that you would like to plug? Can you give us maybe your website or how they can find you on social media?
Yeah, I mean, you guys can find me on Twitch and on Discord. I just joined maybe like 2 weeks ago. Under Dylan Del Olmo. That's just me. Same thing on Instagram. But for anybody out there that speaks Spanish or that's from a Latin community of sorts, born and raised somewhere else, reach out to me. I'm really trying to build a community of people that come from where I come from, and that doesn't mean Mexico specifically. That just means outside of the U.S. Because I had the opportunity to be here, and that's incredible. But I want to make sure that other kids that come from where I come from that maybe don't have an opportunity have a platform where they feel like they can have an opportunity. So, you know, uh, there's this weird thing of like, oh, if you're Latin, you have to work on reggaeton music or you have to work on bachatas or you have to work on, and it's not true. Like, if you ask Snoop, some of his biggest shows are probably in Brazil. Like, there's people that go crazy for some of these American artists or American established artists across the rest of the world. So I know there's kids out there in Chile, Venezuela, Argentina, Puerto Rico, wherever that want to work on music that's not just reggaeton or not just Latin genres. Um, and I'm somebody that, comes from that has made it in the R&B, hip hop, pop scene. So if I can be of any assistance to them, I really want to. So that's what I would love to plug in. And I'm gonna plug in 1500 Sound Academy.
Yes,
Woo!
sir.
Life. I mean, anybody that's in LA or that wants to take the course online, you can always do so. Make sure to check out the 1500 Sound Academy online. We got an Instagram too. And yeah, man, I mean, the sort of stuff that these guys are teaching here is incredible, from
Absolutely.
like emotional intelligence to how to take control of your finances, which are stuff that I never learned how to do, to then the more kind of obvious things, which are like scales and chords and the right chord progressions. They teach you how to engineer. They teach you how to mix your own stuff, how to produce your own records. If you want to just focus on one of the specific lanes, you can, or you can kind of take a broad um, program that gives you all of them. You know, production, engineering, mixing, visuals, um, all sorts of different things. So anybody that's interested in, you know, a school experience without having to necessarily pay for a full on college, check out the 1500 Sat Academy.
Absolutely.
You know,
I endorse it as well.
hey man, you
Definitely
know, and
head
then
over there.
every now and then, you know, the amount of people that have come over to the school and then just decide to jump in and are just visiting the building or having a tour with these guys, and all of a sudden, you know, some of these classes have had Bruno Mars walking in or Ludacris walking in, or you know, Kendrick came by when Ali gave his lesson and talked about, you know, mic placement, and it's just stuff that's just mind blowing, bro.
Yeah,
To know that a lot of these artists are who they are because they have studied the game as hard as they have, you know, and they know stuff that you would have never expected them to know.
absolutely.
It makes you go, hmm, if they're good at all these other things, why? How can I? How is it that I keep making excuses? You know.
Right.
So big
Man,
shout out to James Fauntleroy and to Lorraine Stopson, Pops, and all the family at 1500 for sure. Because I probably wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. You know.
man. Huge shout out to them as well.
Shout
Lance
out to
always
the
drops
family.
gems and stuff. It's awesome having you here, Dylan. Appreciate you.
Hey man,
So,
it's a
I,
pleasure. We'll talk about the nickname story later because I want to get to that. You know, some people know me as Dylon, some people know me as Dylan, but we'll get to that a whole other time.
yeah, for sure. We definitely gonna have you back, and appreciate you tapping in, man. I
Oh,
hope you have a great evening, and
thank you. I hope you do
thanks for
too.
sharing the knowledge that kills. I'll talk to you later,
Kill
bro.
people with
Peace.
kindness, though. Kill people with kindness, not with real guns. Just kindness,
Only
please.
with kindness and
Yeah,
knowledge.
and knowledge. There we go. All right, bro. Peace.
Thank you, man.
Hmm.
And that brings episode 16 of Knowledge That Kills to a conclusion. Make sure next week y'all tune in. We're going to have another episode. I will be headed to NAM June 3rd through June 5th. So if you're in California, make sure that you tap in with me while you're out there. You can find me on Instagram directly below. Make sure that you head over to Dylan's Instagram, give him a follow. Make sure that you head over to the YouTube page and follow it as well. And we'll tap in with y'all soon. Appreciate y'all for joining. Have a good evening. Peace.